Hello everyone, this is the third segment in the lack of davening on Shabbos. And what I want to deal with today is, does this dictate any of our behavior on Shabbos? Specifically, can we go and pay a Shiva call on Shabbos? And can we visit the sick? Clearly, when you visit the sick, it reminds us of Rifa'enu, someone that does not have health, that we should be davening for in order to restore their health. And, as we know, we took it out of davening for the reason that we said yesterday, that either it's forbidden on Shabbos according to the Jerusalem Talmud, or according to the Babylonian Talmud, in order not to bring you to a state of anguish and think about what you lack on Shabbos. So this brings us to an actual Gemara in Masechet Shabbos 12a, in which Beit Shammai says, Ein menachamim avilim, ve'ein mebakrim cholim b'Shabbat. You're not allowed to do either of the two that I mentioned, and indeed explains Rashi, mishum de mitzta'erim and mitzta'arim. Shabbos, it's not a day to mitzta'er, to start thinking about, all we lack. And indeed, it's inappropriate to even go and pay a Shiva call or visit the sick on Shabbos. But we don't paskin that way. We paskin like the Beit Hillel metirin. And indeed, the Shulchan Aruch paskins explicitly, Yecholim lenachem avilim b'Shabbat, vechein yecholim levaker et ha-choleh. So, from this perspective, if you know someone that's sick, you can absolutely visit them. And if someone's sitting Shiva, you should not pay the first Shiva call on Shabbos, inappropriate. But definitely, if you paid a Shiva call during the week, you can pay a Shiva call even on Shabbos when there's private mourning. From this perspective, the question is, what do you say? Which is, do you say the regular Refuah Shlema? Do you say the regular Hamakom Yenachem Otchem? Because that sounds a little like a request. And in Same Gemara, Masechet Shabbos, Yud Bet Amud Bet says, no. Haniknas levaker et hacholeh omer, Shabbat milizok u'refuah korva lavo. Many of you know that from the Mishaberach, which we will get to later. And indeed you say, Shabbos is not a time to request, but hopefully you'll have a refuah shalema. That other suggestions in the Gemara, and eventually the Shulchan Aruch paskins that this is the most appropriate, adding verachamav merubim v'shifto b'shalom. That his mercy is great, and hopefully you will be back to normal in peace very soon. The Ramah says you don't have to say that addition. Good enough to say Shabbati milizok u'refuah krova lavo. When you pay a Shiva call, there's another way of paying a Shiva call on Shabbos. Same idea. Shabbati milinachem u'nechama krova lavo. Shabbat is not a time to offer great comfort and prayers to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but you should have comfort. So we see clearly, absolutely take care of the bereaved and the sick on Shabbos, albeit in terms of davening and what you say, things should be different. The question is why? And now we go to a ramification between the Babylonian Talmud and the Jerusalem Talmud. Indeed, the Gemara said in the Bavli that Shabbos is a time to request, but we don't want to bring tsar to a person. So indeed the Ran comes along and says, you can't ask for mercy now on Shabbos. Namely, you should have a refuah shalema. Again, not someone dangerously sick, someone that's sick in bed, simply because you'll start thinking about everything you lack, which is inappropriate on Shabbos. You should enjoy what you have, and therefore you'll come to tsar, you'll come to anguish. You obviously comfort them, but you yourself should not get to anguish. Rashi, who on the Gemara itself actually said that the reason for this is mipnei shemitzta'er, says in one of the Chuvot, the responsum at least attributed to Rashi in the Sefer HaPardes, that ultimately Shabbos is a day of menucha, a day of rest, v'tzarich lehitaneg bo, and you have to enjoy it. And from this perspective, that's the reason why we took out those 13 blessings of request from the davening, as he says, because meitzer alehem, you start thinking about everything you lack, and you start worrying about, I miss this, and I miss that, and I don't have this, and I don't have that. Indeed, the Rambam in a responsum actually talks about some sort of a piyut that had some sort of a bakasha, some sort of a request in it, and he was asked if they should say it. And he said, Asur lomar davar mien b'shum panim. You're not allowed to say it. Not privately, not publicly, not on Shabbos, and not on Yontiv. And he goes on to say, Bifnei shechachamim zal, because our sages, ikpidu shelo lomar davar yoter katan min hasug hazeh b'Shabbat. That on sages were very pedantic not to say any request on Shabbos. And therefore this Gemara that we quoted said, Shabbati miluzaku fa'akru balavo. It's not the regular refuah shlema we say during the week because of the prohibition, or, as the Bavli said, because of the fact that we don't want to bring a person to anguish. The words of the Rambam, Sheyiyu Shabbatot lemenucha u'moadim lesimcha. Shabbos should be for rest, Yontif should be for simcha, and not make them into days of fasting, days of crying, and days of request and petition from God. And therefore he says, don't say this piyut. So that's the Babylonian Talmud's perspective. Namely, it would be okay to request of God on Shabbos, but we don't want to bring you to anguish. But as we all remember, the Jerusalem Talmud said, Asur litvor tzrachav b'Shabbat. You're not allowed to request of God on Shabbos. And indeed, it's no surprise that in that same Gemara, a few lines prior, the Gemara says that Midocha kitiru lishol shalom Shabbat. Even say the word shalom, hello, would be a problem, because you'll start a conversation, how are you? Someone will actually answer your question, and you'll get to, oh my gosh, I hope everything will be okay. You just requested on Shabbos, which is prohibited. From this perspective, based on that, the Ramban says that based on the Yerushalmi, the reason why you can't request on Shabbos when you go to visit the sick or you comfort the bereaved is you have to change your language on Shabbos. Again, it's not to bring you to anguish or not, but rather the whole language has to change on Shabbos. Just like you can't say on Shabbos that I'm going on Motzei Shabbos in my car. That's a prohibitive act on Shabbos that you're not allowed to talk about on Shabbos. So too, on Shabbos, you can't say things that are prohibited, like requests. No more, no less. Is there a ramification between the two? There absolutely is a ramification. In other words, as the Sidur Hagra says, the Yeshnam Shnei Surim Ba'inyan Tchanunim b'Shabbat. There are two prohibitions regarding requests on Shabbos. One is the Babylonian perspective, namely, Isur Tachanunim Atzara Kayemet V'hu Mishum Tzara Adam Uvitul Onek Shabbos. Namely, you think about what you lack, and it takes away from your enjoyment of Shabbos, Babylonian Talmud. V'hasheni, Jerusalem Talmud, Isur Bakashot La'atid, namely, to request for the future. Says Rav Shmuel Kamenetsky that, indeed, the nafkamina is going to be if requesting from God will bring you oneg. After all, if you're going to hold back, obviously, you're going to be in anguish. Oh, yeah, I'd love to daven to Hashem, but I can't. I'd love to request of God, but I'm not allowed to. So, actually, it would be tanamount to what the Ramah says, that if you would like to cry on Shabbos, and it actually will bring you to oneg, to let it out, then it's okay, because it actually brings you to enjoyment. So says Rav Shmuel Kamenetsky, if the whole reason is Sha'alu litzta'er, then it would be okay to request if holding back will bring you to a bigger tsa'ar, to a bigger anguish. But according to the Yerushalmi, that says it's inappropriate to talk that way on Shabbos, namely, asor litvor tzorchav b'Shabbat. It's like saying, I'm going to go in the car Motzei Shabbos. There's no heter whatsoever. I will point out that Rav Shmuel Kamenetsky actually believes that at the end of the day, these two are not actually two different reasons, but rather one of the same. Namely, he believes that at the end of the day, Shnei Hatamim Echadem. Namely, that if you talk this way, it will bring you to anguish. And I think there's a lot of truth in what he says. Namely, you take the Babylonian Talmud and the Jerusalem Talmud, one will lead to the other. If you talk this way and you start requesting of God, it will probably bring you to anguish. And it will be like a vachadik day, it will be like a regular weekday. Suffice it to say that we saw today that definitely Shabbos is not a day in which we forget those that are missing things. We comfort the bereaved. We absolutely visit the sick, albeit the way we daven to Hashem will change simply because Shabbos is not a day of request. Either because it's totally inappropriate like the Jerusalem Talmud, or because it will bring you to anguish. Whatever it might be, we change the way we daven, but there's no question that at the same time we take care of all those that are in need.